Good evening, everyone, and you're very welcome back to An Art of the Mating. Another year has gone by, and we've kicked back off for the 2022 breeding season. You can't get a pint of Guinness in Ireland after 8 p.m., but you can learn how to use data to find an edge at the sales with Tom Wilson. Tom, you're very good to join us.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks very much for having me on. Massive fan of the series that you've put together, so it's a great honour to be back for the new season. Did you pick the 8 p.m. start as closing time of the pubs? So maybe we get a few joiners.
Well, look, you were talking on Twitter before now that you were having I'm having a pint of water, but you might have been having a pint of gin, which sounds much more like what I'd like to be doing right now. But I'm glad to report, actually, my local distillery delivers pints of Guinness, which is quite a ridiculous experience. They deliver them with the little cappuccino tops on the top. But anyway, we digress. You sent across the slides, and I'm so excited to start off this chat because you've just so much rich data to share, rich insights. But before we do, Tom, I'd love to just get a sense of your background and what brought you to the sport, and kind of what made you, apply Moneyball techniques to the game of horse racing.
So I have no kind of racing background. I was actually, for my sins, I was a management consultant for about 10 years. So I've kind of always been in analytical type businesses. And I've always just been a massive racing fan, probably since my teenage years. Always very interested in the data side. So it was always systems rather than form. And gradually, I just ended up getting deeper and deeper over the years and getting more into pedigrees and then a bit into bloodstock. Probably the tipping point was actually the first lockdown. And I started getting into coding and machine learning, started learning tools, languages like R and like Python, getting into building my own analytical models. And that probably pushed things to a bit of a different level than the traditional descriptive type of analysis you would probably see in the racing domain. And I'm trying to bring that on more of a forward-looking, predictive or forecasting type level. I run a syndicate with a partner and friend of mine, James. We run a syndicate in the northeast of England called NG Racing. We've got a couple of horses in training with a trainer called Grant Tour. You might have heard of him. He had a very good kind of breakout season.
Statistically, very good season, I would say, Tom. I'd say
that
didn't go unmissed.
Yeah, fantastic season. Like a load of winners, load of repeat winners. Kind of ran the data on Grant back in 2019, and we thought he's going to be a trainer on the up, kind of fit our profile a little bit. Young trainer, nice profile, starting out, hungry. Then he had a bit of a disastrous 2020, which is after we just kicked off the syndicates. So it was good to see the approach vindicated somewhat in 2021. So long may it continue.
Brilliant. Okay, well, Tom, just before we go into dive into things, if you were to say to your granny what you do when it comes to horse racing, right? What is in one sentence, just very simply, what's your approach? So I think this evening we get lost a lot talking about AI. We could get lost talking about different languages you use, but really I want to keep it as relatable as possible. If you had to say to your granny, what is it you do when you're using these Excel spreadsheets and you're looking at the data, what are you trying to achieve?
I think when you boil it down to purchasing a horse, I think you're trying to distill it down to two things. So I think the first one is defining ability or predicting ability. I mean, the fundamental, and we all know it, is that at the heart, you need a good horse. You can have the best trainer in the world. You can do the best you can do with jockey bookings. You can be creative with tactics. But if you don't have a good animal at the start, you're not really going to get very far. So I think what we're trying to do is, and I'll explain it in the next couple of slides, is we're trying to look at all of the variables, or as many variables as we can possibly identify, that constitute ability of a good horse. And it's really it's kind of a forecasting problem. We're trying to understand variance between what makes good horses good and what makes bad horses bad. And if we can firstly understand that, then we can explain it. Then we can start and bring it around on a kind of predictive basis to try and then forecast ability of yearlings and foals that we see coming through the ring. So predicting ability would be number one. And then, of course, there's the value component as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we get through. But so I'm a big believer that there's a cut-off point at the moment in the bloodstock market over which no horse can possibly be equated to be of value. think it's probably around the kind of £50,000 mark. I probably wouldn't spend any more on a yearling myself, based on just when you see the statistical correlations between potential ability that you can purchase and then the value that you have to spend through the ring. Of course, the people where money's no object, they have the fortune to spend 200, 300, 500,000 on yearlings. But that's not a value-based calculation. That's obviously in the search of higher glories and perhaps feeding egos and the search for kind of legendary status. But I think the second thing then would be going deeper in the context of the information that we have on horses and of sires and of mares and of trainers and of breeders, to understand how we can then get value. So it's about understanding context behind that, and then using numbers and metrics and calculations that could just provide us a different lens on understanding different types of context in the game.
Okay, well, brilliant. Well, as everyone knows that's participated in the art of mating before, it's very interactive. So we're going to try and take as many questions as we can as we go along. There's a Q&A function, so please ask the questions as we go. But I'd like to kick off, Tom, maybe you'll just rapid fire go through some of your slides and talk us through a bit of your analysis. You know, perhaps not rapid fire, but let's kick off.
Yeah, sure. And I saw the question from Hugh in the chat. We'll go through that, Hugh, on the next couple of slides. We'll talk about what type of calculations we can use to potentially forecast ability, which nicely leads us on. Jack or anyone, do you know who that is?
Casamento, is it? No, it's something.
No.
It's some. What is it? No, it's not Casamento. What? Who got Lope de Vega?
No, it's New Bay.
New
one
Bay.
One of my favorites. So
I like New Bay too. I should know that. I should know that. I'm a bit embarrassed I don't know it's New Bay.
It's all right. There's a couple of tests in for the for the group.
I'm delighted to announce from now on the participants are going to be guessing it and not me.
Yeah, there's another one coming up, so we'll do that one via the Q&A function.
Okay.
But what I really see as well, like, and I think of racing as kind of a series of, it's like a chain of events really, or it's an end-to-end value chain. And I think what we've got is at each of these decision points and each of these moments, we've got the opportunity to exploit information and exploit data to hopefully make better decisions, to improve our probability of getting a good outcome. But it's also about managing and mitigating risk. So if you think about this kind of series of kind of steps, I mean, you've got the mating decision, and everyone's kind of thinking of the matchups today, and kind of as we step into the season now. And I think you've got information there. There's a lot of the stuff like the equinome stuff that the folks over in your neck of the woods did, in the DCs and the CTs and the TTs, and understanding the genomic profiling of certain horses and certain crosses between sires and dams. I think you can use that to enhance your probability of a positive kind of breeding outcome. If you look at molecular matings over on Twitter as well, that's quite a nice account, and they're looking at kind of different DNA haplotypes of different kind of families and lineages, and what DNA matches constitute kind of breeding a good horse. And then you've got like the purchasing decisions of foals and of yearlings, and that's what I'm trying to do here, is understand what constitutes a good yearling and how we can stack the odds in our favor there, in terms of let's buy a greater proportion of high performing or good potential ability yearlings than poor potential ability yearlings. And then you've got things like trainer placement as well. So I'm a big believer in that. You've also got to uplift your probability of success on the track. The trainer factor is a huge factor. It blows my mind that people spend 200, 300,000 on a yearling and then send it to a rubbish trainer. So it just doesn't equate. It's like you do a lot of great bloodstock work and then you send it to a crap trainer, and you're effectively nullifying the ability ceiling that those horses could have. And then you get into jockey bookings and targeting races and race strength and individual tactics for races, etc., etc. But I am a believer that if you're a breeder or an owner or a trainer in the game, you should be looking across that value chain and taking data sets at each decision point and trying to use that data to stack the odds in your favor.
Yeah, well, I can say that I've had two New Bay 2-year-olds for our syndicate.racing, and that data set has produced two 2-year-old winners. So for me, that's I won't look beyond those statistics in terms of his merit as a stallion. So moving on, then you might give us a kind of early insight then into some of how this kind of plays itself out, Tom.
Yeah. So maybe to explain my process a little bit. So I've been capturing kind of daily horse racing results in a database, and I've got a database back to 2008 of every result in the UK and Ireland. I don't cover any other jurisdictions at the moment, but it's every flat or weather jumps race across the UK and Ireland for the last, 13 years. But then on the back of that, what I'm then doing is I'm then doing around 120 custom metrics and calculations from that result data, and some of those metrics equate to the individual horse themselves, the individual runner, some equate to the sire, some equate to the dam, some equate to the trainer, some equate to the dam sire, some equate to the sire of the sire, some equate to the jockey, etc., etc. But I've been gradually building that over time, so I've got this kind of enormous data set that when you then get into it, you've got a lot of kind of richness and a lot of potential context there to use in informing decision making at those various points that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. But that's probably the most time consuming thing, is just collecting the data and putting it into a database and managing it, and then creating calculations on the back of it that then can be used to kind of inform your decision making moving forward. So that would be then the step we call feature engineering. So feature engineering kind of would be more of a term in the data science realm. But what we're doing there is we're then trying to create calculations and metrics that we can use in analytical models, and then bringing together and testing all of these different calculations and these different variables in my analytical models that I've built in the context of yearlings to try and forecast and predict yearling ability. I think when I started out, so I had this 120 calculations, and it's refined down to 17 now, because what you want to do is you want to look at what are the most influential variables that help explain performance or help explain ability. So as I mentioned, what we're trying to do, it's a forecasting problem. We're trying to understand the variance between good horses and bad horses. And actually, you don't need 100 different calculations to do that. You need 17, 18, 20 good ones that have rich context and that don't kind of overlap with each other, that explain different elements of that variance and that composition of ability that you're trying to get to. And you can then bring them into a model, and you can start and forecast and produce outputs and probabilities of, say, horses reaching certain ability thresholds. What I'll show you as well is that I then bring it into a framework where I produce a series of predictions. I use official ratings, and I use official ratings as a banding. And my models then output almost a forecast probability of a horse, a yearling in this case, reaching a certain ability threshold or a certain official rating banding. So I'm trying to predict, like, does this horse have a chance of a 30% chance of being a 100 plus horse, or a 15% chance of being a 100 plus horse? And really what we're trying to do is separate out good horses from bad horses. That's where it's very effective. It's very difficult, I would say, and I think someone would be lying if they said they could give you a data model and tell you exactly who's going to be a good horse. But what you can do is, if you engineer the right features, you collect the correct data, and you kind of compose it together in the correct manner, then you can get to an explanation of the variance between good and bad, and thus stack the odds in your favor a little bit when you're purchasing.
So chat me through the variables then you said once you put through. So just there's a list of, these are all the variables that are coming in. So this is all the inputs that are being put into, and you've kind of identified these as being key to the output, to moving the needle, if you will, of performance for that horse. I note you have consignor performance. I suppose that's the best proxy to breeder performance, is it? Is that how you think about that?
That's how I think about that, and it's a bit of a funny one, that, and some people have challenged me on that one, because sometimes the person who consigns at the sale, as you know, isn't the person who necessarily prepared them or kind of bred them and raised them. But I have found it does have analytical influence, and it does help in predictive power in the model. So I do throw it in there. It's not overly significant. Some of the other factors are more influential, but it's still a useful differentiator to have. Particularly when you look at the breeze ups, it's something that I'm looking to focus quite heavily on, because, you know, kind of in terms of the delineation between different breeze up consigners, and some will of course be better than others. And it'll also be interesting to see which consigners are good at just preparing a horse for a breeze rather than necessarily preparing a horse for a breeze to then deliver on the track as well. So I think it's an interesting variable to explore.
Absolutely. And so it doesn't always go right though, does it? Sometimes when you're making these predictions, it's not correct and you need to account for that. So how do you structure that? How do you look at that?
Yeah, just a couple more words on this one, Jack, if that's
Yeah.
all right, and then I'm going to pick that one up in a second. But the variables that I use a suite of variables, looking at the sire, the dam, the performance of the progeny of the sire, and the performance of the progeny of the dam. That's why I've starred that one. Actually, it's a very important principle for me. I think when you do any statistical testing to try and understand the future performance of progeny, what I believe and what I've learned is that actually the on-track performance of the sire themselves or the dam themselves has very little analytical influence. As soon as you start getting progeny, that is so much more influential in being able to then forecast the performance of other progeny. So of course you've got a big challenge when you're trying to build models around first season sires, but what I love is when I've got a second crop, third crop sire, when you can really start and get into progeny performance, because metrics on progeny performance will always massively trump whatever the sire themselves did on the track. I almost see it as two different disciplines. And it's a bit like if you think about football, if just because you're a good football player doesn't mean you're going to be a good football manager. Just because you're a great racehorse on the track doesn't mean you're going to be a great producer and you're going to be a great sire. And I'd say the same for dams. So I think you have to evaluate each performance in each discipline on its merits. Now, people might throw Frankel at me, and of course, Frankel's the greatest ever racehorse, and he might be on the way to being the greatest ever sire and take over the mantle from his father. But as a rule of thumb, across a massive data set of 50,000 horses, progeny performance is more influential than anything a sire could ever do on the track.
No, and I think that echoes a lot of, you think about, leading stallions today that have from their bootstraps become leading stallions. You think of Dark Angel, you think of Kodiak, you think of Invincible Spirit. They all started at lower levels. You think of Sayuni, he started at lower level. Actually, okay, Galileo, Frankel, Kingman, of course, were exalted, but actually, it's a great fun journey, to be honest, following sires on the up like that. It really, it's probably my favorite part of the game in a lot of ways, that you try and get those stallion selections right. And I think you'll be helping us later on. I know a lot of people on this call, we've 68 all around the world. They're probably, some of them are making mating decisions as we speak. And they love to hear, how you think about that and how you perhaps pick that, more unheralded stallion that perhaps could be on the rise in coming years, which of course is how many breeders eke out a profit, and what is a very difficult exercise to eke out a profit in any event. So great. Okay.
And I think, Jack, and to bring the kind of the value perspective.
I'm very worried now, Tom, on this. Now, if we could lose people on this chart, so let's try and be as simple as possible here in terms of what you're trying to convey here, because this is fascinating.
So what this is, so this is a chart that shows the results of that model. Sorry, I'm just gonna. So this is something we call the confusion matrix, and this is showing the results of back testing on 1,200 yearlings, or nearly 1,300 yearlings. So this would have been my predicted rating for certain yearlings based on an official rating kind of band or threshold, and this would have been their actual achieved rating. So this is what I would have predicted when they were going through the ring as a yearling, based on the data we would have had at that time, so kind of at the point of their yearling sale, based on some of those variables that I mentioned on the previous slide. And I'm using things like percentage of rivals beaten and percentage of rivals beaten squared, and a number of prize money metrics off the back of that. Prize money is a very good, strong proxy for class. But what you see is, it's no silver bullet. So of the horses that I predicted to be 100 plus horses, 44% of them made it to be 100 plus horses. So it was less than 1 in 2. But what I do like is that if you look at it, of the horses that I predicted to be 100 plus horses, then actually, what's that, 63%? So it's almost 2 out of 3 either became a 90 plus horse or a 100 plus horse. So what we're doing is we are capturing the better horses in a certain type of bracket. And with some of the people that I've worked with and I've spoken to, I've said, so if I can give you a list of horses and be aware that you can look at 3 and 2 of them are probably going to be good and 1 of them is going to be rubbish. And I can't tell you which one's going to be rubbish. You have to make that decision yourself. But it's better than looking through 1,000 horses and having to try and make that delineation all yourself as well. So what we're really trying to do is we're trying to push up and separate the better horses into this bracket, because the horses that I then think should be 90 plus or between 90 and 99 rated, well, 30% of them ended up actually being 90 to 99 rated, but 25% of them actually ended up being 100 plus. So it was better. The performance was better than I forecasted. So again, that's coming out then at 55%. So it's almost like a 1 and 2 hit rate. And then if you look at the lower part of the quadrant, the horses that we're predicting to be poor horses, or lower grade class 5, class 6 type horses, well, again, we're generally creating more of a separation. We're getting them right as a population. So I don't want to stand here and say we got this nice analytical model and the complete silver bullet, but it is effective in shortlisting and targeting where you spend your further follow-up sales time.
Yeah, and it's as we talked about, it's about moving the needle, you know, and I think over time, if you're to make 10% better decisions each year with your matings, that of course has a compounding effect that you will benefit from that over time by a much greater extent than the 10% in one off year. So it's by thinking in this manner, you can actually deliver exponential results more longer term. You know, it's like when you talk to a great investor, they talk about what you should do when you're younger in terms of making money. They say, you very boringly, you should invest in an index fund that tracks the stock market, because the stock market invariably rises and you benefit from those compounding effects. So even though you might only be putting in 50 quid a month or 100 quid a month, you can become that millionaire in the future because you have the benefit of compounding maths, which is, you know, I think is a very, very interesting aspect to your work here, how you can move the game in your favor. So you might just give us kind of what this data, how this looks, what does this?
Yeah. So this would be a kind of a typical output. And so I wanted to show you, this is some results from some back testing. So again, this is kind of proving the model on some historic data, I think since 2013 or something. So these would be the successful predictions where we've kind of looked at the profile of a yearling, and then we've kind of pulled all of the metrics and calculations on it. And then as you see what my model does, it spits out a percentage prediction based on each OR banding about what kind of level we think the horse can get to. As you see, I mean, these have, and then what we do is the one with the highest kind of percentage prediction in the OR categorization becomes the kind of de facto highest prediction output. So I mean, a load of standard ones you'd hope that we'd get right, all of a number of Galileos, but I mean, I quite like Mildenberger in there as a nice showcase one. I mean, Teofilo, a couple of Teofilos in there, Bubbles on Ice, a Star Spangled Banner in there. So you're seeing a lot of the stuff you would have done anyway through traditional pedigree analysis and just looking at the page, but hopefully it's given you a couple of different perspectives. This is how it looks when it goes wrong. So as I said, I don't want to just sit here and say, yeah, analytics gets absolutely everything right. So we've had a number of horses here that have been predicted to be, look at this one, Oasis Song.
Yeah, I hope the owner of Oasis Song is not on the call this evening.
Yeah,
might bring back bad memories of this 34% likelihood of being 100 plus horse, and unfortunately was in the 50 to 59 bracket.
Yeah, exactly. But that shows, doesn't it? There's certain decisions that you can make at, say, a purchase point when you're picking up yearlings, but there's a million things that can go wrong after that point. As I mentioned, like trainer placement's a really big thing. So you might be, I mean, I don't think it's going to turn 100 plus horse into a 50 rated horse, but trainer placement is a big decision point. I mean, then you've just got the physical things, like some of these horses just might not have stood up to the trials and tribulations of racing and training. So there are a million things that can go wrong after the point of purchase, but let's try and get that purchase point correct with the most informed and the greatest contextual information that we have access to.
And I'm sure there are purists watching right now who are saying, well, we're not talking about the physical of the horse. You know, we're not. Now, we're going to definitely touch upon, Tom, I'm really interested about your work you know, looking at the mechanics of horses and actually your studies around that. I'd love to, we're going to talk about that at the end, but just to flag that to people, it's definitely going to be part of the discussion more later, because it's a really, really interesting and emerging work that you're doing around that. So we've seen the good ones, we've seen the bad ones. Metrics. So what is a metric, first of all? What is that in this whole kind of recipe for success that we're trying to dissect tonight?
So as I mentioned, I'm pulling in kind of daily results, so a big old database of kind of all kind of race information and horse information. And then I'm doing a number of different calculations. So metric is just a calculation. So it's just a number that we're calculating or deriving from a number of different other numbers or a number of different variables. Think of it as perhaps a KPI or something like that. But as I mentioned, I use a metric called percentage of rivals beaten quite a lot. That is one of the most kind of influential metrics in the current model that I've got. If you don't know what that is, I'd really love to explain it, because it really gets to the crux of a lot of this type of thinking. Like traditionally in horse racing, we use things like win percent quite a lot. It's like, oh yeah, what's the win percent of the sire's progeny, or what's the win percent of that certain horse? Now, win percent is a really bad metric at explaining performance, and let me tell you why. Because for a couple of reasons, it's all contextual, because it doesn't contain any context really. Because what win percent doesn't tell you is the strength of race, the horse ran in or won in. It doesn't tell you the size of the field the horse ran in or won in. It's a very different proposition winning in a 5-runner field than it is winning in a 16-runner field. However, most of the common metrics that we use in kind of the general horse racing industry don't take account for these type of things. So that's why you need kind of more metrics that have deeper contextual meaning and contextual understanding. So what percentage of rivals beaten does, I mean, it looks at the percentage of horses beaten across the start or across all starts, and then does it as a percentage or does it as a ratio. Because what that allows you to do, it allows you to understand all levels of performance through the entirety of a race. So even coming 8th of 16 can still be quite a good performance if you're in a strong field of 16 horses. So it's this type of thinking that we really try and engender, and we're trying to bring in deeper contextual understanding about the numbers that we use to then talk about performance in racing. So I use that quite a lot. Apologies, I don't think you can see the top headlines because of the bar. I use typical things. This would be winners to runners ratio. So this is pulled, I think, at the start of the 2021 season. Some of the charts that you'll see aren't the most up to date because I've pulled them out of historic blogs. So it's more there just to illustrate the purpose and some of the methodology that sits behind it. But this would be winners to runners ratio. I think we use that quite a lot. So we're looking there, and we look at kind of Warfront, and we look at performance of progeny of Warfront. I mean, by my calculations at the start of this year, 199 runners in the UK and Ireland and 133 winners, giving you a winners to runners ratio of 66%. So I do use that. I don't actually use that in some of the analytical models, but that's kind of like an entry level metric that we use for grading performance. Jack, I would be interested, because you do quite a lot of the kind of pedigree analysis for Syndicate Stock Racing. What type of metrics or numbers would you be looking at to qualify an opinion or to pick out a new bear?
So you might turn up your nose at this, but I would rely a lot on Racing Post ratings. I would think, you know, the first point of call when I'm trying to analyze a Racing Post rating is, first of all, I would look at the, you know, you look at a horse like Ulysses, you know, that's a horse that a lot of people are thinking about in next season. You would look, okay, there's a lot of horses in the 90s on Racing Post ratings, but actually when you delve into it, I would then look at, well, how many starts have they had? Are they achieving a 90 in a nursery rating? Are they actually doing this in one maiden, and it's a high quality maiden at that? For me, if you see ratings like that at a very quick glance, that's how I think about things on an early emerging sire like that. I'd be looking at number of runs, rating achieved in those number of runs, and then from that I would deduce, Time Test, I'd be bullish on. I'm bullish, to a degree on Ulysses. Those sires start emerging. I think Cody Bear is a very exciting stallion. I think that's where I would kind of tap into where these pockets of value might be in the market. Coolsey would jump out as a stallion that statistically has done quite well. But then you have to also think about a lot of other variables, right? You have to think about quality of mare received. You have to think about backers that are behind that stallion. And of course, the most important thing, nomination fee. We're looking at this list here and we're seeing Warfront, Frankel, Scat Daddy, Dubawi, all these sires I'm never going to be able to breed to, right? But you go down and then you see Star Spangled Banner, okay, 35,000. That's interesting. You see Far, an exceptional sire. Now, on top of that, unfortunately, Far is subfertile, so it can be difficult to access Far blood. But of course, there are alternative options in the market for that. Australia performing very well. So it's all part of a kind of a soup for me. There's no silver bullet, as we talked about, but that's why I always love looking at your analysis, because I'm trying to see, does it mirror what I'm thinking as well?
Yeah, and I think it's what you've explained there is it's a similar kind of mindset. We just kind of picked on a different set of metrics because it's kind of metric first, but then also underlying context and then value. Yeah. So fundamentally important. I mean, this would be another set of kind of figures that I would use quite frequently. This would be kind of group runners to runners and group winners to runners. I mean, I know everyone would use this typically quite a lot. You might use stakes winners to runners as well. But what I'm generally looking at there is out of the crop that have come from the sire, or out of the crop that have hit the track, what percentage of runners made it out to be group class or made it out to be stakes class, and which percentage of runners made it out then to be group or stakes winners. But then what we're also starting to bring in is the average sales price of yearlings. So as you say then, Jack, then what we can do is we can, and again, I'll show you kind of a method of doing it, but we can look at kind of a correlation between winners to runners ratio, or group runners to total runners, or group winners to runners, and then correlate that against sales price to see, okay, where might there be value and where could we be looking to exploit perhaps unfashionable sires in the marketplace. I'm going to skip through that. I think it was what was a big game changer for me kind of as an analyst was bringing in purchase price. Because I was always just, because they're different data sets. I have my daily results data set, and then you have of course you have your sales data sets, but I spent a long period of time going through and manually pulling in all of the sales results from Goffs, from Tats, from Arcana into my own database, converting the currencies so you could do a consistent kind of comparison. And then when you start and compare that to performance, that's where the opportunities start to open up. This is, again, I think this is group. This is, sorry if I just look for a sec. I think that's group runners to total runners again. It's interesting. I just think Warfront's kind of he's out on his own, as you say. We can't afford him, but Warfront and Galileo were totally out on their own. And then I think Frankel obviously is following up close behind. I would be typically looking in this kind of middle bracket, because I think here's where we've got some.
So maybe we might just dwell there for a second. So are there particular stallions there that you would say, in your expertise, are underestimated perhaps by the market that might offer people a little bit of value?
There's probably 4 that I like, Jack. I do think Bated Breath can throw out a decent group level horse. I mean, he's had a couple of kind of group caliber horses in recent years. He's had Sacred Bridge, Space Traveller, Made in India, Breathtaking Luck. And what's the cover now? Is it 15,000 for Bated Breath? Yeah. So I think Bated Breath can throw you a good one. Mason, I think, is often hailed by the value seekers as being kind of one of the most value sires that's out there. So what's his cover? 6,000. I mean, you've got Oxted there, you've got Rohan, so you've got group level sprinters that have been thrown out in recent years. So Mason would probably be a poster boy a little bit of some of the more analytical types. I put something on Twitter the other day. I'm a big fan of Dragon Pulse, but it seems like I'm the only person who's a big fan of Dragon Pulse because his covers 2,000.
You're going to need to talk me through Dragon Pulse and why you're a fan of Dragon Pulse. And no offense to Dragon Pulse, but he is a sire that's standing at €2,000. I believe it's payable prior to the cover. Is it? One thing I do know about Dragon Pulse is he gets a lot of winners. Is that where your analysis is coming from? And perhaps he does not get elite level horses. I think from memory, his highest ever rated horse is 105 RPR, but I do know he's got a very, very high win ratio. Is that where that analysis is coming from?
That's what it is. So if you use winners to runners, Dragon Pulse comes out really high. So it depends what you're looking for. And a €2,000 cover, I think just getting the chance of a high proportion of winners on the track, I think is a good proposition. We'll also come on to it, but if you look at the opportunity that Dragon Pulse has been afforded, I don't think he's been afforded the same opportunity as some of his contemporaries. So he doesn't always get, well, he hasn't got the most fashionable mares and he hasn't got the best mares, but he's done quite a lot with the profile of mares that he's been given. And I suppose that really speaks to what we're trying to do here is, again, look at context, look at opportunity, and he gets a big proportion of winners from perhaps a middling or a poor caliber of mare. What would happen if we were to uplift the caliber of mare that we went to him? What if the market responded to some of those data points in Dragon Pulse and brought him a bit more into fashion? You don't know what he could achieve. But at the moment, someone, as you say, Jack, and someone quite rightly said it on Twitter, it's because he hasn't thrown out really high class or high caliber horses. But
well, I don't know if you have the phone number of Willie Mullins on your Rolodex, Tom, but Willie bought the Dragon Pulse winning bumper prospect off Richard O'Brien this week for Team Double Green. So Willie is obviously going all in on Dragon Pulse for his assault on bumpers going forward. Which I think is, it's very interesting. You wouldn't, but it's really, so it's very, very, you can have counterintuitive thoughts with this approach. You said you mentioned 4. We've heard 3. What's the next one?
And then if I was going to spend some money, so I'd probably spend some money on Star Spangled Banner, who we've mentioned. I mean, we've seen State of Rest, but I think at 35,000, you've got a really good opportunity for a high caliber horse coming out of Star Spangled Banner. And I also like Le Havre as well. I think Le Havre, you've seen some really good caliber horses come out in recent years. I mean, Ville de Grace, wonderful tonight. Suedio, Normandel, so stands for what, €40,000. So I think Le Havre is probably someone that maybe isn't as appreciated as he could be.
I'm a big believer in Le Havre, and I'm a big believer in Star Spangled Banner. Of course, our family farm bred State of Rest. And actually, State of Rest is very illustrative of some of the points you've made, because State of Rest is out of a mare called Repose, and Repose is a quiet American mare who went into training, but wasn't particularly fast in training. She was unraced, and we brought her home, and she has produced since that point State of Rest, of course, but also Tranquil Lady, who was a stakes related 2-year-old this year. So just that just shows sometimes that she's a very well related mare, beautiful pedigree, but wasn't the all-star performer herself. But what you were saying tonight, Tom, is for buyers out there, look at the progeny performance. Don't look perhaps at the mare performance.
Yeah, if she's a good producer, she's a good producer. So she's proved herself in that discipline. And believe in that rather than worry too much about the race record would be my recommendation.
Okay. Dragon Pulse, we better touch upon it. 106 is the highest rated horse he's ever had. But I'm looking at his winter runners record, and it is very, very strong. So I can understand the appeal if you wanted to start off a mare in the right way, get a winner on the board, but maybe not a black type winner, maybe €2,000, where we found a bargain for 2022 for people. We might ask the Irish National Stud, will they knock off 250 quid for Art and Mating listeners that want to book their nomination tomorrow? But here is the quality of mares received. So this is something all stallion masters want to see. They want to see themselves top of the table when it comes to quality of mares received.
Yeah.
What is a quality mare, though? You've talked a little bit about what you think is important. How have you deemed a mare of quality?
Well, so I've basically decried official rating throughout the entirety of this podcast, and then I'm going to use official rating. as I've mentioned, there are better metrics, I think. But again, this is the currency that we talk in. We talk in official ratings or RPRs or time form ratings. So I think it helps to illustrate the kind of the point the best. But this is something that I crunched earlier in the year, and I was looking at so of the mares that had been sent to certain sires, can we evaluate, as you say, the quality of mare that they've received as kind of part of their stock and as part of their crops? And that was a very interesting exercise. I mean, you kind of see it as you would expect. You see the Galileos and Frankels of the world at the top. Interesting about None Never. I think None Never was getting a poorer quality and caliber of mare in the early days, but that's of course shot up in recent years. This is going back till 2008, so you see quite a lot of historic data in there as well. But I think that's a very interesting metric to look at for a couple of reasons, because what I'm doing on the right hand side is I'm then looking at what is then the achievement of their progeny. So what is the highest official rating then achieved from the output of their progeny? And we're trying to do the kind of the distinction between, okay, what were they achieving with their crop of foals from the population of mares that then were kind of inputs to or producers of that crop of foals. Because what it's then telling us is what influence does the sire have? Like,
so if we're looking at this basically in layman's terms, if you are way above this line, as we see with No Nay Never, as we see with Night of Thunder, as we see with Warfront, as we see with Galileo, you're doing very, very well. We won't verbalize those lurking at the bottom of said line, but this is illustrative of, this is the opportunity I've been afforded, the quality of mares I've received, and this is how I'm performing against that opportunity. So it's taking away perhaps, some side, we talked about Frankel right from the start, he's been afforded every opportunity in the world, but if you look at the line of what would be the expected outcome, he's still outperforming that. So he is he is an exceptional sire.
Yeah, and I think the ones down here are the ones that are interesting to look at. It's the ones that, again, aren't perhaps getting the profile of mare, but are still uplifting the stock.
So we talked about Beta Brett. We can see Champs-Élysées, Dandy Man.
Champs-Élysées, RIP.
Yeah. Memas, of course, a sensational start. We see T. Philo there, who's probably represents some value at 30,000. There's lots of active stallions there that perhaps people could access at affordable fees and do quite well from and produce quality racehorses. Okay, we have only 17 minutes left, so I'm conscious if anyone has any questions, please pass them along. Tom would love to answer them, and I'd love to rapid fire through them. But here we are on assessing sire uplift based on the quality. So you might talk us through what these charts are telling us.
So this is just another chart of the previous one you've seen before. It's basically the pounds of uplift in terms of caliber.
But this is reverting it, so to show No Nay Never kind of at a more prominent position, top of the table. Night of Thunder, 75,000 at Kildangan, Memas, 50,000. So you can see those three stallions, and the Dragon Pulse has never had a night like this. This is, a Dragon Pulse is the second coming. We can decree it tonight.
So just call it the Dragon Pulse podcast.
The Dragon Pulse Tribute Act. He is also showing that he's got an average dam OR of 60, but he's getting 75. Now we talked about Racing Pulse ratings. I know it's not OR, but hasn't got 1 over 106. But he'll get you a winner. And for a lot of people, breeding a winner is their goal in life. It's not about breeding a Derby winner. It's not about breeding a Guineas winner. It's about achieving something which is affordable for them to do. And I think this is why this data is not just powerful from an elite perspective, but it's also so empowering for people at the lower level to think, I can compete and I can get a winner on the racetrack.
What I'll do, Jack, because I realize we're up against time, I'll rattle through a little bit. What this is, again, this is looking again, it's a very similar thing. So it's looking at sales price. What I do is I do a kind of linear regression equation. If you remember maths or stats from school, you used to have the line of best fit. So basically you draw the line of best fit, which is kind of the linear regression equation. And that tells you what perhaps the price should be or the amount of winners that you should get. I'm going to make all of these slides freely available, so and you can follow up to me for questions. But we're a bit up against time. These are some metrics that I really like because, as I mentioned, they get a bit more contextual. So I look at, rather than, this is going deeper than then winners to runners or stakes winners to runners. So I look at what proportion of kind of the horses or the progeny receive a rating of 90 plus, 100 plus, or 110 plus. And what's very interesting is that, I mean, most horses are poor horses or are average horses. Like, it's quite hard to get, what's very hard.
I'm actually going to screenshot this slide and send it to all syndicate.racing owners all around the world, because this will set expectations appropriately, I think.
Yeah, I don't want to like burst any dreams or blow any bubbles, but I mean, that's the hard data. It's very hard to get a very good horse, and there's only a small proportion of horses in the population that are elite. So I mean, 6% of horses on the flat and all weather achieve an official rating of 100 plus. But again, what's useful about this is that's almost a population-wide benchmark, and we can use that as an expectancy level. So then you can look at a sire and say, well, if across the entire racing population, 6% should be my benchmark. Well, if a sire is throwing you 8 or 9% of the horses that are reaching an ability threshold of 100 plus, then you've got a 3% level of overperformance. Now, these would be metrics that I would start and use in a model. So these are in the analytical model, because I find them, these are very helpful contextually. So a load of numbers there. Sorry, go on, Jack.
Actually, if you put me in charge of horse racing, and it would be a dictatorship role, I'm delighted to announce. And I was allowed to change one thing I would love to change, catalogs. I'd actually make catalogs. Black type would be 100 plus, or perhaps maybe 105 plus, and then non-capitalized black type, lowercase black type would be 95 plus or something like that. I think that would be a lot more illustrative to the quality of pedigree than the approach we have today, which is the freak occurrence of some people getting black type and some not. If you win the Royal Hunt Cup and you do it off top weight, you should get full black type. That's my perspective on things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's far easier to get black type at Redcar or Catterick in a listed event than it is to get in a listed event at Ascot or Newmarket, because the race strength is fundamentally different.
Yeah.
So again, it's a very flawed concept, but again, in traditional pedigree analysis, we don't acknowledge it. But that gives us opportunity.
So what is this showing us now? So this is showing it's a percentage of horses. It's listed by horses 110 or plus. So these are sires that are getting elite horses. So the top class horses. You can predict who's top of the table almost. Warfront is really performing well tonight. But then you see horses like Far is available at 15,000, and he's getting a number of horses rated 110 plus. DXB far above, loads of top class horses, but for 15 grand. But then you go below that. I'm trying to pick out other examples. Someone that's looking for a good runner, they could go to Scirocco, couldn't they? For 3 grand, he is still available. He is, and he produces quality racehorses. It's just it weren't commercial in the sales ring when he was owned by Darley. It's a really, really different take than perhaps just the follow the fashion that so many of us ascribe to. Which this analysis and this very important work, Tom, is showing that doesn't have to be the case. You can swim against the tide and have success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you're looking at, again, sire ability as a producer, these are really good metrics, because what we're doing is we're comparing against a benchmark of the population, what the average sire should be able to achieve. And then we're looking at overall underperformance. So this is, again, how many progeny, how many reach 90 plus, how many reach 100 plus, how many reach 110 plus, what's that as a percentage? What should it be based on those population benchmarks that I mentioned? What was it, 16%, 6%, and 3%? Then it tells you how many horses they should have had in those brackets. And then you can look at the actuals and say, well, actually, we were 600 horses over based on the 100 yearlings and foals that we had. 6 of them above average reached a ability threshold of 100 plus. That's a sire that I want to go after. And that's...
Okay, I'm conscious we need to get through some questions. So 2 here relate to a great idol of mine there, Mark Johnson. I'm actually reading his his biography at the moment, which I'm hoping to steal a few value nuggets from. But Keith McGuinness and Ben Smithy, they both asked similar questions, which how does data transmit to pin hooking, especially with first season sires? And does buying a foal at a discount to the sire's stud fee represent value? So maybe just when you're thinking about buying decisions, how would you explore that, Tom?
Yeah, I think I might not answer it directly, I'm afraid, Keith. I do apologize.
Like, you're a good politician. Don't dodge the question. Dodge the question.
What I would say about pin hooking, perhaps, I think what I really like is so I've done some work on first season sires, and I've kind of got in my analytical model for the yearling sales last year, I've got then forecast on who I think will be top first season sire. I think it will be Havana Grey. If it's worth anything to anyone.
Well, it is, because he's not favourite. Soon
yeah, he's second favourite. There's an odds-on favourite.
That's let's load up the price. Let's smash and grab that price. Sioux Nation, forget it. It's Havana Grey, says Tom. I think he's 2-1, so you can have what you like in that. To say Tom's refunding all losing bets. Actually, he
was 9-4 before we had our money on. So but I think what you can then do is, if you've got an analytical framework and say, actually, I think Havana Grey is going to have a great season. I'm going to get involved in the foals of Havana Grey after doing the work on the yearling sales August to October. There's an opportunity there. You're almost you're ahead of the game, or you hope you're ahead of the game before they actually hit the track, and then the value starts increasing in the kind of in the public eye a little bit. I think what you can also do with pin hooking as well, or even for the yearling sales, when you look at things like the strength of the mare pool that a sire has been sent, and if you look at it year on year and you see that actually Dragon Pulse had a poor set of mares this year because he wasn't in fashion, but then everyone drank the Kool-Aid and everyone sent him a great set of mares in early 2022, and we see that at the in the next batch of sales in the upcoming years, actually his mare pool's increased. Perhaps we should be buying some Dragon Pulse foals, because perhaps we're going to start and see an upturn in increasing fortunes on the track. So just by putting those different metrics on the kind of the different parts of the process, that you can identify different opportunities to enter the market.
We've already have someone say, could you come back next week? So it might just become, we thought it was going to be the Dragon Pulse tribute act, but it might just be the Tom Wilson tribute act this week. Let's talk about dams. We were very interested in this gentleman and his approaches to dams. Tom, you might just illustrate how he thinks about the importance of dams.
Yeah, so the dam, and then you see a picture of Mark Johnson. I mean, Mark Johnson's there. I mean, he's quite famous, isn't he, for his kind of rigorous approach around when he's purchasing yearlings, and almost the threshold he places on the quality of dam, the progeny that he purchased. I think his threshold is the dam herself had to be rated 90+ on the race tack, and she also must have to have produced the 90+ progeny. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe that's what I had in my head also.
Yeah. So it's something like that. And so that fascinated me. So I went and explored it a little bit, and I thought, and that says, do you need a dam with a high official rating to get a good foal? And as soon as I started looking at it, I started challenging that assumption a little bit, and that's all we're ever trying to do here, is kind of challenge traditional conventions a little bit. I mean, and I think that's a list since 2010 or 2012, and it's our highest kind of rated horses on the flat in the UK and Ireland in the last decade. And if you look at the caliber of some of those mares there, I mean, it's not high. I mean, Batash is the famous one, of course, isn't it? Anna Law was only rated 45. I mean, she was incredibly well related. But I think the predisposition to go through a catalogue and look at, was the dam a good horse? Did she achieve a good official rating? I think it can lead us to filtering out and missing good horses. Now, what I do believe is what Mark Johnson did get right is have to have produced a progeny 90+ horse. That comes back to, as a producer, is a very good metric.
Yeah, and I think Love would also feature on that list. She would have a 49 rated dam. I think Pickaboo's rated 49, something like that. And she was the dam of a very good horse. I think it was Lucky Cristal. I think what's also very illustrative of your point, you might not have, I'm sure you did cop this, but actually on the right-hand side, George Bowen, Ventura Tormenta, Mr. Win, and Mutahadi are all out of the same mare. So they're all out of, and Kevin Blake won't mind me revealing this, Midnight Oasis, owned by the ITV analyst Kevin Blake. And that shows, right? She produced, I think her first horse was Mr. Win of that list. And she was the one, she paved the way to be a good producer. So it's not, people come to the horse and training sales and they did perhaps dismiss horses rated lower ratings. It's an indicator, of course it is. They were slow as a boat. Of course they might statistically are unlikely to produce a fast horse. But here we are. Look at it. Anna's Law. That's the dam of Batash, isn't it?
Yeah.
She was rated 45, and it produced Batash. There are no rules in this game. Okay, so that's a dam, and this kind of further show us what does this mean, Tom? How do we?
So what I then did, Jack and everyone, is I then kind of crunched the numbers on the dams. So and then looked at okay, what was the official rating of the dam to then achieve? I think this is 100+ horses. But what this is meant to tell you is that to get 100+ horse, this is almost the separation that you need to be thinking about when you're thinking of your mating decisions or when you're thinking of your purchasing decisions. So I didn't think that 90 was the cutoff. I thought that 70 was the cutoff. So if I was doing it, I would want a dam that was rated either above 70 on the track, and I'd want her to see her have produced good progeny. But also what's quite interesting as well is look at the 0 to 40s. Basically look at the absolute terrible ones. I mean, they're not that bad. There might be value in that 9.94%. So 9.94% of that sample of 1,000 horses that reached 100+, 9% of them were from dams that were rated between 0 and 40. Now, that's probably because they might have had the class to be a high class horse, but probably physical things got in the way, like they got injured. Or they just didn't have enough runs. Now, it doesn't mean they don't have the class or the potential as a producer. It just means physical things hampered them.
Yeah, it's funny actually, Tom. I think about it a little bit differently, but kind of similarly in that I think to achieve an official rating, right, you need to have run 3 times. Now, your data might have another analysis, right? So if there was a horse that has run 3 times, they have some degree of soundness, and to achieve that rating, that perhaps is in excess of just that unraced horse that just didn't make the track. I'd be interested. Have you compared this against a horse that's unraced? Is that 0 or
unraced isn't counted here. So
how does unraced perform?
I wouldn't know, to be honest.
Okay.
I'd have to look at it. But this is ones that have raced but haven't got have got a really poor rating.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but I'd be potentially exploring them. There might be some value in there if they're very well related, and if you can understand the reasons why they couldn't make it happen on the track. But otherwise, I'd be looking at mares that are rated 70+. That would be my threshold. Because as you see below there, there is a differentiation. If you really want to get the better level horses, you want to increase your probability of getting a better level horse, get a dam that was rated 100+. But actually the distinction isn't that high, and you can probably still have a lot of good opportunity in the 70 to 80 or the 81 to 90 brackets as well. Okay,
brilliant. Now, this is a topic I think most people love to talk about. Value sires is definitely one I seem to be having a coffee about and a debate most frequently, especially this time of year. The Irish Stallion Trail coming up Friday and Saturday. Very much encourage people that are on the call to come to that. Great opportunity to see these leading stallions and see these value sires, and perhaps do a deal based on Tom's analysis that he's given to you tonight. Talk us through, Tom, some value sires. Maybe pick out some more other ones other than the 4 you identified.
Yeah, I'll try. I've given you all the goodies already. Does anyone know who that is?
I'm not going to possibly comment.
Okay.
We're going to give it 2 seconds. I'll come back. Kick on, and then I'll see if anyone got it.
It's Dragon Pulse, by the way.
Okay, so here we go. So these are the
right. So here we are. So this is let's use winners to runners ratio again, just because it's a conventionally used metric. So this is for the end of the flat season 2021. So going up to end of October 2021. How did sires perform in terms of winners to runners ratio? And I haven't included all of them, but I've pulled out a few that I want to talk about. So we've talked about the Halve, we've talked about New Bay. We know all about Night of Thunder and Wootton Bassett as well. I mean, potentially some value down the bottom in Cable Bay or even in Zebedee, perhaps. Ardad obviously getting kind of a lot of press and getting a lot of attention, and potentially someone really on the up. But what we then do is, what I've then done is I've brought in the Yearling purchase prices from all of the Yearling sales this year. So we're kind of looking at compare actuals. So how was the actual on track performance in 2021? And then how was the actual sales performance, and how much were people spending on these progeny of these sires in the ring? And then what we can do is, again, I've used my similar linear regression equation and my line of best fit. Anything, and this is different actually, anything that is below the line is value based on what we've seen on the track this year and what we've seen through the ring. Because what's that showing you is that the x-axis is winners to runners ratio. So you've got a high winners to runners ratio the further you go on the right. And then the y-axis is average yearling purchase price. How much were people spending on the yearlings? So we're equating purchase price versus winners achieved on the track. And I mean, there, who comes out well? We've mentioned a couple already. I'm a big fan of territories in general. We've mentioned Mason. I'm a really big fan.
And I think Territories is a very good example, actually, because he's a horse that your analysis would definitely point out, because he's had, I think he has 2 or 3 120, 110 horses that are handicappers that have achieved no black type. He had a winner on Champions Day, didn't he? You know, he's got exceptionally good horses that perhaps haven't achieved the conventional, you know, success of other stallions, you know. So I think he's an interesting one. He's an interesting one, 100%. I see Free Eagle below him. You know, he's available at €5,000. Ardad, he's, you know, 12,500 sterling. Does Make Believe, Ballylynch, 17.5. You know, there is ways of eking out, you know, a mare for your stallion here.
Yeah.
Or stallion for your mare. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Great.
So, and this will all be freely available afterwards, as I mentioned. My model rates Territories progeny very highly. It rates Caravaggio progeny very highly. For I need next year, I need New Bay and Caravaggio to have good years. If I do, then my analytical business is off the ground, and if they don't, then it's back to the drawing board. Good. And then, Jack, how much time do we have left?
Well, I can know by the level of participants that haven't left the call that they are very riveted by what you're telling us, Tom. So we'll keep going and we'll power through as best we can, while mindful of everyone's time. The best trainers. Now, I'm just going to go mute for this section, actually, to be honest. We're going to talk through who might be the individuals that you should send your horses to. I think they're all great, and I think they're brilliant at buying horses too, especially when they're over 100,000. Not like what you said earlier. Okay, talk us through who you think might maybe unheralded and good value.
Yeah, and I think it feeds into one of my earlier comments that I think trainer placement's a massive thing. So don't spend a lot of money on good yearlings and send them to crap trainers, please. And I think what we're always trying to understand, again, as I mentioned, is context. Like, are the best trainers really the best trainers, or are they just getting the best horses? Because again, it's all about opportunity.
So is Aidan, are you telling me, is Aidan O'Brien a spoofer? Is that what we're going to learn when we go to the next slide? Is that it, Tom?
Not Aidan, but there's some other high profile ones that are.
Okay.
Tell you what, John Gosden is a genius though. Like, if you look at John Gosden, like, he gets out the most expensive stock, but he still overperforms on all of the metrics. So Johnny G is an absolute legend.
Okay, there you have it.
So here we go. What we can look, this is from the start of 2021, but I ran some figures on the yearling data that I could get, and then I could map through where those yearlings had been sent to different yards, and looked at the average yearling purchase price that was getting sent to certain trainers. And unsurprisingly, we see Aidan and Charlie Appleby at the top, like far at the top as well. And then kind of a bit of a drop to then Saeed and John Gosden and Aaron Burrows. So you've got kind of got Coolmore in there, you've got Godolphin in there, and you've got Shadwell in there, really. And what I'm really looking at, similar thing, is I'm looking at which trainers are overperforming based on the value of stock that they've been given, because that is, I mean, that's performance, or that is the trainer uplift that you're getting. There's a funny thing, if you look at like football statistics, the average wage bill normally predicts the Premier League table. So if you spend the most on wages, you'll probably win the league, because of course you'll probably have the best players. But if you can separate the value of wages, or if you can separate the value of the stock that someone gets, then all you're left with is then trainer ability. And that's what we're trying to understand. Sorry, you can't again see the top.
We can see the top. We can see the top. Don't worry.
Oh, good. Maybe it's just on my screen presenting. So again, these are figures then looking at, and we used a similar approach. We looked at how many runs had certain trainers had with their horses, how many wins had they got, the win strike rate, and then used a linear regression equation to then almost forecast or create a line of expectation, what that win percent should have been based on the value of the horses that they were getting into the yard. So what we can say is we can look across all of the horse population, and we can look across all of the value of that stock. And you should see a line that says the more valuable horses you get in the yard, the higher your win percentage should be. And what we're looking for, again, is trainers that perform above that line of expectation with the value of stock.
So I think this is the great beauty of your work, Tom. You know, looking at this, you know, I could be confused as to, you know, where the analysis is, but when you show us kind of how you illustrate it, it really is powerful. So yeah. I'm looking forward to having a look. So here we
go. Thanks for the prompt, Jack. So then we go to the kind of the map a little bit, or the chart. Sorry if it's a bit fuzzy, but you can see I mean, here's the line of kind of expectation based on the value of horses that the trainers have got. I mean, it's very hard for Charlie Appleby and Aidan O'Brien to be above the line just because they're such outliers. I probably should adjust for them and take them out of the sample, to be honest, because they're such large outliers. So we'll kind of discount them. But I mean, I think Jay Lyons is probably the best case in point here, and how he's built his business over the last decade or the last 15 years. I think he is a trainer that continually delivers above the value of horses that he gets sent to him. So if you're looking to place your horses with a trainer in Ireland, Jay Lyons is firmly my recommendation. As I mentioned, John Gosden is often above the line despite having very valuable stock. William Haggis is an absolute genius. And we use these type of metrics in selecting the trainer that we work with. As I mentioned, Grant Tour we work with in the UK, and it's just a very small trainer, or was a small trainer in North Yorkshire, but just had good underlying figures, getting wins out of inexpensive horses. Hopefully now Grant gets a higher caliber and a higher value of horse through, and we can kind of continue to see that win threshold pushing upwards. But yeah, evaluating trainers, kind of, I call it wins against purchase price. So you look at the expected wins based on the purchase price of the horses they've got, and you look at the actual wins, and we look at the differential.
So shout outs there also, you know, Keith Dalgleish, Mick Shannon, Tom Dascombe, Martin Mead, lots of trainers performing above expectations. So, you know, they should be heralded for that. So it's very, very illustrative work. So we're going to have a focus here. This is Shadwell. So what are we exemplifying here?
So because I think Shadwell's a really good case study to illustrate that kind of thinking in practice. So when kind of Shaker Hissa announced kind of middle of last year that after Sheikh Hamdan's kind of death, that they would be restructuring the estate and kind of rationalizing their portfolio. I mean, that just fascinates me, because I thought, oh, well, what should Shadwell do? If I was Shadwell, what would I be doing? Where would I be sending my stock? So it gave me a chance to dig into the data a little bit. So I looked at the prices of yearlings let's look at the trainers that Shadwell have sent stock to over the course of the last decade. John Gosden, of course, Owen Burrows was training exclusively for them. Ed Dunlop got a lot, Roger Varian, etc., etc. So looking at, who've been getting the most valuable Shadwell yearlings. You can also look at homebreds as well. And then we're looking at, wins against kind of expectation. So how are they delivering compared to the expectation of the values of yearlings that they've been sent? So as I mentioned, John Gosden and William Haggis always consistently above the line. Roger Varian, very good as well. I mean, not getting the most expensive yearlings from Shadwell, but still delivering a high level of performance. Sorry to call people out, but I really did think Ed Dunlop was delivering significant underperformance based on the profile of horses that he'd been sent. So when I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, what would I do as Shadwell? Now, I'd probably centralize all of my horses with John Gosden and William Haggis. And if I was rationalizing my portfolio and kind of reining back my operations. And I think that's kind of the direction that they've gone in. And I think Shaker Hissa generally places her own horses with John Gosden. So I think looking at the numbers, again, it allows you to illustrate how, as a full racing operation, might you want to build a trainer portfolio and what metrics you should be putting behind that. And I actually think they're doing the right thing in what they're doing. And I think the strategy they've taken on future trainer assignments and placements is the correct one.
Okay, good.
So there's, I mean, that's again, and again, we use similar things, yearling prices. How many of those yearlings went on to be group runners out of total runners? Again, Dunlop was a bit under, Owen Burrows was a bit under. How many of those runners went on to be group winners? So we're looking at group winners to runners ratio, et cetera, et cetera. So just a practical example based on something that was in the forefront of the racing media last year to bring some of those metrics to life in a real life use case. And that is it. So thanks for listening, and thanks for going through all of the tables and the charts. I hope it was useful.
Well, that's brilliant. And I think the last, case study was just someone on this call. There's 71 of them. Surely one of them has, maybe just an odd 500 million down the back of the, the couch that they can empower you to follow through these data-driven decisions and kind of make decisions, because it is really, really incredible work. It's illuminating work, and what I like about it as well, it's counterintuitive. You're looking at it, you're challenging conventional thinking, and it's making people reflect on their own decisions and their own biases and think, am I making the appropriate decision? So Tom, sincerely, thank you very much. I know so many of you have enjoyed it and participated this evening with questions and everything else. We are going to do another session, some more sessions. So we're going to do a first season Sires chat, a National Hunt Sires chat, and we're also hopefully going to do a Instagram live from the Irish Stallion Trail, which I'm looking forward to getting out and about. So I hope people will join us for that. But sincerely, Tom, thank you very much. If you've other suggestions of things you'd like to hear if you have questions for Tom, if you have questions for me, just send us a message. Best thing is probably Twitter. Shout at us very loudly with a mention on Twitter, and we'll be guilted into responding. But thanks so much for all of you for tuning in on a Monday evening, and thanks again to Tom for a wonderful evening of chatting through how to make data pay at the sales and on the racetrack. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.